The gentle hum of the Porsche Cayenne's engine was the only sound keeping Dr. Marcus Bennett awake as he navigated the empty suburban streets of Cedar Grove. The dashboard clock read 2:47 a.m. Another marathon shift at Metropolitan General had left him drained, but satisfied. Just hours earlier, he'd given 8-year-old Tommy Wilson a second chance at life through a delicate heart procedure. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pristine hood of his new car. 2 months of ownership, and it still had that fresh leather smell. His mind drifted to his son's face when he'd first brought it home. "Dad, this is like a spaceship," Miles had exclaimed. The memory brought a tired smile to his face. The flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror shattered his peaceful moment. Marcus felt his shoulders tense as he immediately switched into autopilot, the same routine his father had drilled into him since he was 16. Turn signal on. Slow and steady. Pull over carefully. Hands at 10 and 2. Registration and license ready. The police cruiser's high beams flooded his car with harsh white light. Marcus squinted, watching in his side mirror as a figure emerged, hand already resting on his holster. The officer's deliberate, heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel shoulder. "Get your hands where I can see them." The command came sharp and aggressive before the officer even reached the window. Marcus slowly raised his hands, heart pounding despite having done nothing wrong. Officer James Sullivan's flashlight beam shot directly into Marcus's eyes. "You know why I pulled you over, boy?" The word boing landed like a slap. Marcus kept his voice steady, professional. "No, officer, I don't. I was following the speed limit and—" "Step out of the vehicle," Sullivan barked, cutting him off. "Slowly. Keep those hands up." The cool night air hit Marcus as he carefully opened the door. His hospital ID badge caught the flashlight's beam as it swung from his neck. "This your car?" Sullivan's tone dripped with skepticism. Before Marcus could answer, the officer was already speaking into his radio. "Dispatch, I'm gonna need backup. Got a suspicious vehicle, possible theft. Over." "Sir, this is my car. I can show you the registration." "On your knees. Now." Sullivan's hand moved to his weapon. "Hands behind your head, interlace your fingers." Marcus felt the rough asphalt through his expensive slacks as he knelt. His mind raced to his son, to his patients, to his position at the hospital. One wrong move, one misunderstanding. "Listen, Officer Sullivan," Marcus read the nameplate, keeping his voice calm despite the humiliation. "I'm Dr. Marcus Bennett, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Metropolitan General. My registration and license are in the glove compartment. I'm just heading home after a 16-hour shift." Sullivan scoffed. "Yeah, right. And I'm the Pope." He moved closer, flashlight beam scanning the luxury vehicle. "Where'd you really get this car? These run what, 100 grand? Insurance fraud is a serious offense." The distant sound of another siren grew closer. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. He thought of his father's words, "Stay calm, stay alive. Your dignity can handle a few bruises, but your mama and I can't handle losing you. Face down. Spread your legs." Sullivan's boot nudged Marcus's ankle roughly. The cold ground pressed against Marcus's cheek as he complied. He could smell tar and motor oil. His surgical hands, the same ones that had saved countless lives, were now being roughly pulled behind his back. Well, what do we have here?" Sullivan pulled Marcus's wallet from his back pocket. The second patrol car pulled up, its lights adding to the garish display. "Everything all right, Jim?" The new officer approached, younger, looking uncertain. "Got a suspicious subject in possession of a high-end vehicle," Sullivan reported, thumbing through Marcus's wallet. His tone changed slightly as he found the medical license, but he quickly covered it. "Says he's some kind of doctor?" "Because I am a doctor," Marcus stated firmly, still face down. "I just finished performing emergency surgery on a child with a congenital heart defect. Call the hospital. Ask for Dr. Peterson, the chief of staff. He'll verify everything." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. "Jim, maybe we should—" "Check the vehicle," Sullivan ordered, cutting him off. "These carjackers are getting creative with their stories these days." Marcus felt the cold metal of handcuffs click around his wrists. His mind went to his son again. Miles would be asleep now, expecting to see his father at breakfast. What if this escalated? What if he didn't make it home? The next few minutes stretched like hours as Sullivan continued his investigation, making a show of running the plates, checking every document in Marcus's wallet, and peppering him with condescending questions about his profession. "So, doctor," Sullivan's voice dripped with sarcasm, "what kind of surgery did you say you do? Heart and lung stuff? Pretty complicated for someone like..." He caught himself, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Marcus remained silent, knowing anything he said would only make things worse. He focused on his breathing, on staying professional, on making it home to Miles. His knees ached from the asphalt, his wrists burning from the too tight cuffs. The younger officer returned from checking the car. "Everything seems in order, Jim. Registration matches, nothing suspicious in the vehicle. Just some medical books and a kid's baseball glove in the back." Sullivan stood over Marcus, clearly frustrated at finding no evidence of wrongdoing. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. It was the kind of moment that could go either way, a grudging admission of error, or an escalation born of wounded pride. Little did either man know that the next radio call would change everything. The crackle of the police radio pierced the tense silence. "All units, emergency dispatch. Officer Sullivan, respond immediately." Sullivan kept his eyes locked on Marcus, hands still resting on his weapon. "Sullivan here. Go ahead, Jim." The dispatcher's voice was unusually personal. "It's Sarah. She's been rushed to Metropolitan General. Severe complications with the pregnancy. They need you there now." The color drained from Sullivan's face. His hand fell from his holster, suddenly slack. What happened to Sarah?" "Preeclampsia, severe bleeding. They've lost contact with their on-call cardiac specialist. Jim, it's not looking good. They're saying both Sarah and the baby." The dispatcher's voice cracked. Marcus's medical mind kicked into high gear. Preeclampsia with cardiac complications, he'd seen this before. His own mother. The memory of that loss hit him like a physical blow. Metropolitan General? Sullivan's voice had lost all its previous authority, replaced by raw fear. "That's 40 minutes away in this traffic. Sarah needs specialized cardiac care in the next 30 minutes, the radio crackled. "They're trying to reach other surgeons in the area." Marcus spoke from his position on the ground, his voice clear and professional despite the handcuffs. "Officer Sullivan, I'm the cardiac specialist they're trying to reach. I just left the hospital. I can help your wife." Sullivan spun around, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions, desperation warring with his earlier prejudices. "You're lying. You can't be." "Check my credentials again," Marcus said firmly. "I'm chief of cardiothoracic surgery. This condition, I've seen it before. Time is critical. Every minute we waste here." The younger officer stepped forward. "Jim, I just ran his full credentials on the computer. He's telling the truth. He's one of the top surgeons in the state." Sullivan stood frozen, his world crumbling around him. The same man he'd forced to the ground, humiliated, and handcuffed was potentially the only person who could save his wife and unborn child. "My mother died from complications of preeclampsia," Marcus said quietly. "I couldn't save her. But I can save your wife and child, if you let me. Right now." Sullivan's hands shook as he unlocked the handcuffs. Marcus rose slowly, brushing off his slacks with dignity. Years of emergency medicine had taught him to compartmentalize, push aside the humiliation, the anger, the injustice. Right now, 2 lives hung in the balance. "I'll drive," Marcus said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "My car's faster, and I know every shortcut to the hospital. You can keep your weapon trained on me the whole way if it makes you feel safer, but we need to move." "No." Sullivan looked at his service weapon, then at Marcus, shame crossing his features. He holstered the gun. "Please, save them." The Porsche's engine roared to life. Marcus pulled away from the curb with Sullivan in the passenger seat, the other officer following in the patrol car with lights flashing. The same hands Sullivan had cuffed now gripped the steering wheel with surgical precision. "Tell me everything about Sarah's pregnancy," Marcus commanded, taking charge of the situation. "Any previous complications? How far along is she?" Sullivan's voice trembled as he answered, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. 36 weeks. Everything was fine until last week. Her blood pressure? As Sullivan spoke, Marcus navigated the empty streets with calculated aggression, his mind already mapping out the procedure he'd need to perform. When did the cardiac symptoms start? She said her chest was hurting this morning. I told her it was probably nothing. Sullivan's voice broke. Oh God, I should have listened. Marcus took a hard turn, cutting through a service road he knew would save them precious minutes. Don't think about that now. Focus. Has she had any previous heart conditions? The drive became a rapid-fire medical consultation. With each passing minute, Sullivan watched the man he'd profiled and degraded transform into something else entirely, a consummate professional, a medical expert, possibly his wife's only hope. They screeched to a stop at the emergency entrance exactly 18 minutes later. Marcus was out of the car before the engine fully died, already barking orders into his phone. This is Dr. Bennett. I need OR3 prepped immediately. Get Dr. Chin for anesthesia and have blood products ready. Page Dr. Wilson for obstetric backup. As they rushed through the doors, Sullivan caught Marcus's arm. Dr. Bennett? But Marcus cut him off. Save it. Your wife needs surgery, and your baby needs their father. That's all that matters right now. He strode toward the OR, calling back over his shoulder, the waiting room's on the second floor. Someone will update you regularly. The last thing Sullivan saw was Marcus disappearing through the OR doors, his shoulders set with determination. The same man he'd forced to kneel on the asphalt was now literally holding his family's lives in his hands. The night had become a crucible where prejudice collided with grace, where hatred faced humanity, and where redemption waited on the other side of a surgery that would change both men forever. 5 hours. Officer James Sullivan had paced the waiting room floor for 5 excruciating hours, each minute an eternity. His uniform, usually a source of pride, felt like a lead weight on his shoulders. Every time the OR doors swung open, his heart stopped. But it was never for him, never about Sarah. Until now. Dr. Marcus Bennett emerged, still in his surgical scrubs, his surgical cap in his hands. His face showed the exhaustion of a man who'd performed 2 major surgeries in less than 24 hours, but his eyes were clear and steady. Sullivan stood on shaky legs, unable to read the surgeon's expression. Your wife is stable, Marcus said, his voice professional but gentle. We had to perform an emergency C-section followed by cardiac repair. There were complications, we lost her twice on the table, but she fought back. Both Sarah and your daughter are fighters. Sullivan's legs gave out, and he collapsed into a chair, tears streaming freely down his face. My daughter? 5 pounds, 8 ounces. Healthy lungs. You could hear her crying in the OR. A small smile crossed Marcus's face. They're both in recovery. You can see them soon. You saved them, Sullivan whispered, looking up at the man he'd degraded just hours before. After everything you saved my family? Marcus sat down across from Sullivan, his surgical cap twisting in his hands. I took an oath to preserve life. That oath doesn't come with exceptions for people who hurt me. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Sullivan spoke, his voice raw. My whole life I was taught certain things, believed certain things. Then tonight, he wiped his eyes. I put you on the ground like a criminal, and you turned around and saved everything I love. Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to see people as people, Marcus replied. I watched my mother die from the same condition Sarah had. I was 14, holding my father's hand in a waiting room like this one. The hospital didn't have a cardiac specialist available. That's why I became one. A nurse appeared at the door. Dr. Bennett? Mrs. Sullivan is asking for her husband. Both men stood. Sullivan hesitated, then extended his hand. Marcus looked at it for a long moment before accepting the handshake. The recovery room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Sarah lay pale but alive, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Marcus entering behind her husband. Sarah, Sullivan's voice was thick with emotion, this is Dr. Bennett. He's the one he saved you both. Sarah looked confused. But I thought, you said on the phone earlier that you'd pulled over some suspicious. I was wrong, Sullivan cut in, his voice firm. So wrong. And I almost lost you both because of it? Over the next hour, the full story came out. Sarah's face showed a range of emotions, shock, dismay, and finally a deep gratitude tinged with shame at her husband's actions. What's her name? Marcus asked, checking the baby's vitals with gentle hands. Sarah and James shared a look. We've been discussing it, Sarah said softly. If it's all right, we'd like to name her Marcella. After you. Marcus paused, his hand resting lightly on the baby's blanket. That would be an honor. 6 months later, Marcus sat in the witness stand, his testimony clear and unwavering. Sullivan had reported his own previous incidents of racial profiling, triggering an investigation that revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior in his department. His testimony against fellow officers had cost him friends but, as he said, had saved his soul. The police community program they started together became a model for other cities. It wasn't always easy, change never is. But every time tensions rose, people remembered the story of a black doctor and a racist cop, and how grace proved stronger than prejudice. 1 year to the day after that night, Marcus was performing a routine checkup on little Marcella, now a thriving 1-year-old. Sullivan watched from the corner of the exam room, his police uniform replaced by civilian clothes. He'd transferred to community relations, working to bridge the gaps he'd once helped create. She's perfectly healthy, Marcus announced, letting Marcella grab his stethoscope. Just like her mother, Sullivan smiled, then grew serious. You know, I never properly apologized for that night. Marcus shook his head. You've done better than apologize. You've changed. That's worth more than any words. As they walked out of the exam room, they passed a young black medical student who nodded respectfully at Marcus. Dr. Bennett, your son's downstairs. Said something about a baseball game? Marcus checked his watch and grinned. Miles and his team made the playoffs. We're celebrating. Marcella's birthday party is next weekend, Sarah spoke up, cradling her daughter. Miles should come. All of you should. Later, watching his son pitch from the bleachers, Marcus reflected on how life's darkest moments sometimes led to its greatest light. His phone buzzed, a text from Sullivan with a photo of Marcella wearing a tiny doctor's coat, a gift from her latest checkup. The message read, "Thank you for showing me what a hero really looks like." Marcus smiled and turned back to the game, where his son had just struck out another batter. In the end, it wasn't about changing everyone's mind or fixing centuries of prejudice. It was about those small moments of transformation, one heart at a time. And somewhere in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a little girl named Marcella was growing up with a story that proved love could overcome hate, and that sometimes the most powerful medicine of all was simply seeing the humanity in each other.